All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the film Foxcatcher, made in 2014. Let's do a brief review of the plot. So, true crime, Olympic wrestling. There are three main characters. You can see them on the movie poster. You have John DuPont, played by Steve Carell. He's in the middle. And then the Schultz brothers. One is on the left, played by Channing Tatum. That is Mark Schultz. And on the right, we have Dave Schultz. Dave Schultz is the older brother, Mark is the younger one. And in the movie, they are both gold Olympic wrestlers. However, Mark is dealing with a lot of financial problems. He doesn't have much money. So, this very rich person, John DuPont, reaches out, says he can come and train at his place, which is a farm somewhere on the East Coast, very remote. Mark agrees. Later, Mark is convinced by John DuPont to try to get his brother Dave to join as well. Dave is reluctant to join, and eventually, as Mark continues to compete, the rich guy, John DuPont, is styling himself as the coach of the team, even though he knows very little about wrestling or competing in general. He has some problems, some sort of complex with his mother, becomes frustrated with Mark. He spends a lot of money to get Dave into his team, which is called Foxcatcher. Now, John DuPont is shown to have this controlling, almost in a manipulative way over Mark. He tries to become this father figure, this coach, someone he looks up to. And initially, Mark does. Mark definitely respects, quote unquote, coach John DuPont. But as John DuPont brings in Dave to try and do this 5D chess move to try and get Mark back under his control, Mark actually, under the good coaching advice and the strong mentorship of Dave, starts to succeed again. Although initially he resents his brother because he feels he's been living in his brother's shadow. After a while, he comes to his senses and realizes that John is the one who has been a negative influence on both his competition and his life. So he decides that he can no longer compete with Foxcatcher. He can no longer compete as part of John DuPont's team. And although John DuPont tries to insert himself back into Mark's life, his plan to use Dave and Mark and try to control them together backfires. He ends up losing Mark. Mark throws at the Olympics, which is the big competition that they were gearing up for, and then leaves the farm. And it's shown that John DuPont, the rich guy, gets more and more paranoid, and this eventually culminates with him killing Dave. And his killing of Dave seems to come out of the blue, but to us, the viewer, it's shown that his jealousy and feelings about the Schultz brothers is what causes him to kill Dave. So that's an essential synopsis of the story. I couldn't really do a 2-hour movie justice in 4 minutes, but there you go. Okay, so the main character, DuPont, or one of the main characters, is shown as being very rich. He's an heir to a very rich old family in the United States. And one controversial part of the movie that it showed was his relationship with Mark. Remember, Mark is the younger brother, as shown on the left in this poster. And it is implied that DuPont has more than a mentorly love for his, quote, student, unquote, Mark. So this is shown especially in many scenes, but there's one where DuPont comes in the middle of the night and wants to train with Mark. And it's really dark. Both of the characters have their clothes on and they're doing some wrestling moves. And ostensibly they're training for some made-up tournament that DuPont made so he could win a wrestling tournament as an older man. Either way, it's shown a lot throughout the movie that DuPont may have sort of a sexual relationship with Mark. And the director has stated repeatedly that no, this was not our intention. It was not our intention to show any sort of homosexual relationship. This is just an unfortunate consequence of us trying to show that DuPont, the older rich man, is encroaching into the life of this younger wrestler that he's trying to control. He's getting into his personal space. Now, the primary source, the person at question here, Mark Schultz, is extremely adamant that there was nothing even remotely sexual or homosexual about their relationship. So he generally distances himself from DuPont in general. They didn't have any sort of close relationship. DuPont was just some sort of rich guy that gave him a lot of money to wrestle. And the movie depicts him as looking up to DuPont even in the beginning and making a speech that praises DuPont as his father figure. And the real life Mark says that, yes, while he did give a speech, it wasn't that explicit. And really, he tried to avoid praising DuPont in general because he thought that DuPont was weird, which he definitely was. Worth noting here is that the director, you can look at it two ways. Essentially, the people who made the movie, maybe they didn't want to show a relationship or any sort of sexual tension between the two characters. They just wanted to really drive the point home. And the movie is about wrestling. So any wrestling scene can definitely be mistaken for having homosexual undertones when really it's more about a power struggle. So you can look at it that way. Regardless, the reviewers and many viewers obviously looked at the scene, and really it's in the dark. People can misconstrue that, and the person in question, so Mark Schultz, the primary source, definitely had a problem with it, especially after he heard all these reviews talking about the scene that way. He did not feel that it was accurate at all, and especially he had problems with showing DuPont as this person who was able to really get in his head and control him. So really, I would go with the primary source on here. Probably the movie exacerbated the relationship between them. It probably was not that deep, and it certainly was not sexual. DuPont is shown to have this desire to be a parent and a mentor in a way to make his mother proud of him. So you can see the generational trauma there. And his mother in the movie takes no interest in his wrestling and considers it low and really does not seem to take an interest in him in general, which is part of the whole reason he is doing this. So you can see that this causes him a lot of pain, this relationship with his mother, and maybe this is reflected in the way he tries to be a father or brother or mentor to all these young wrestlers, when in reality he has no qualifications other than his money in terms of trying to assume any position over them. So you can see that it's a very lonely man, and this part has been corroborated, that he had problems with his mom, and he also really tried to make her proud. Many sources have said that, yes, this is the case. Another thing that I want to note in support of the quote unquote sexual proclivities of this man is that he was, in fact, accused of sexual abuse at a university program, and he was accused by a coach, a male coach. So also Mark Schultz, the same person who said that there was no sort of relationship of this sort between him and DuPont, said that DuPont created this wrestling move called the Foxcatcher 5, where one wrestler would grab another wrestler's private parts with 5 fingers. Really, whether DuPont was predatory towards people is not 100% verified. All right, so in the movie, there are many scenes showing DuPont using firearms. He also buys an armored personnel carrier. and mounts a machine gun on it. This is sort of a Chekhov's gun. We don't really see him do anything with it. He just buys it. It shows how eccentric he is. But it turns out that in real life, he would ride this APC, or as people would call it, a tank, around his property. And it seems that he did have some sort of obsession with firearms. That he's very egocentric, which both the movie and real life seem to agree on. Though both the movie and real life do agree that he had a bad cocaine habit, which was definitely not helping in terms of his psychological faculties. One thing I want to say that the movie did not show was that he asked to be buried in his Foxcatcher outfit in real life. So yes, he did have some sort of obsession with this Foxcatcher team that he was building, so much so that even in prison he wanted to be buried in this outfit. Okay, so let's talk about the Schultz brothers. Now, real life and fiction diverge in two major ways here. The main being that while they were close and while they had a very good relationship, a very close relationship, in the movie, they really play up this idea that Mark was resentful of Dave. Mark being the younger one, he was resentful of always living in Dave's shadow, and this causes him to go towards a different father figure, in this case, John DuPont. It appears that this never really had any basis in real life, though the two had a very close relationship and it may not have been perfect. It did not reach the tensions that they did, or their characters did, in the movie. The movie does portray the fact that they had a hard life growing up, but it shows that Dave was completely this loser who couldn't really establish connections with people, or not really loser, but just someone who could not talk to people, a little bit aloof, whereas personality-wise, it was a little bit exaggerated for the movie. The movie also hinges and I think develops its thesis for the murder based on a completely made-up time frame in which Dave and Mark lived together at the farm. While it's shown that they were not together at the farm for the full time, which is true, the fact is they were never together at the farm at all. So there was no scenes that should have been with Dave and Mark at the farm. Mark left a year before Dave even moved in. So because of that, it doesn't really make sense. A lot of the scenes that show the film's motive for the murder, which we will get to on the next slide. Okay, so what was the motive for John DuPont murdering Dave? In the movie, it's very clearly shown that is the relationship between Dave, Mark, and DuPont, this triangle relationship that ends up causing the murder. Dave, being Mark's older brother, was his original mentor, his coach. DuPont tries to take that role and slip himself in there, but he fails. Not only is he just this random old rich guy, but he has a huge ego and he has an inability to connect with other people. He brings Dave to his farm in an attempt to control Mark, to make him do what he wants, but this backfires because Mark ends up going back to Dave and getting rid of this father figure that he sees in DuPont. So in a fit of rage at having been usurped and losing his only friend, Mark, who leaves Foxcatcher, DuPont kills Dave. So this is the film's motive. It's this whole mentor-coach dynamic that DuPont wants and cannot have, and in jealousy, he just kills Dave as a result. So the murder of Dave is very centered around Mark in the film. In real life, it is a little bit less complicated. It seems that Dave and Mark were not really even associated with the farm together. They never lived together on the farm, and there wasn't really a huge conflict between them about mentorship or being in someone's shadow or ego or anything. It seems that DuPont, as he grew older, did more drugs, and maybe just as a consequence of many psychological factors, started to suffer from paranoia, believing that everybody was out to get him. And eventually he believed that Dave was trying to ruin his life, ruin his athletes. So he took a revolver, drove out, and killed him. It was mostly mental illness that caused this. Obviously, DuPont was never a normal person. He had his own personality issues, but as he got older, it became worse and worse, where it developed to this point where he was straight up delusional. So Mark and DuPont's relationship was not that deep. It was really not that involved, and it didn't really have much to do with the murder of Dave. So yeah, those are my main points on Foxcatcher. I think it's a great movie, and it generally gets in broad strokes the tragedy of what happened, as well as the themes of competition, coaching, control, and ego that are present in sports, but also sadly present in the reasons for why Dave was murdered. However, it gets a lot wrong, and it tries to show things in order to portray its own themes, so it bends the events of reality a bit. So if you look any further than the broad strokes, you're going to see a lot of inaccuracies. One thing that was noted by Dave's widow, who was present at the murder of Dave, was that they really portrayed it accurately and tried to make the scene as close as possible. As far as the other best source on the matter of what happened, Mark, extremely critical of the film. He has said he wants to get rid of the director. He hates him. He's also said that the film is extremely great, and he's praised all the actors and the staff who've worked on it. So he's gone back and forth multiple times. This is not just a one-time thing. He's pretty self-aware about it himself. He said that he doesn't even really know what he thinks about the film. It's mostly what other people tell him. And while he's watched it himself, it seems he can't really make up his own mind. I would make a conjecture that this event in his life was extremely traumatic. He lost his brother, and the film does show him in a negative light sometimes, maybe as an unconfident person or someone with a loner personality, which obviously anybody would find a problem with. But also, he has praised some parts as being straight from his book, so very accurate. In other words, there are elements of real life in the story as well. So if it's hard for a person who's actually in this situation, who's deeply involved, the brother of the victim, to make up his mind about it, it is hard for us as the viewer as well. But as long as you realize that there are key differences between the events in history as well as the events in the movie, I think we've arrived somewhere close to the truth. That's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed.